A Roman walks into a bar and holds up 2 fingers. He says, 5 beers, please. Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Drunk History. This is a series in which I drink some alcohol and talk about history, starting from the Bronze Age going all the way up to present day. In the last episode, we started off on the Second Punic War, how it started, the causes, and some of the characters. In this episode, I hope to cover most of the major battles of this part of the war. If I have time, I'll go on to the end, but I suspect that I won't. When we left off last time, Hannibal had just crossed the Alps and found his way into Italy, sending the Roman army into an absolute panic because it's all the way down in Sicily, while Hannibal is attacking up in Etruria. Or should I say, one of the armies is down in Sicily. See, now I have to talk about the Roman political and military system, because they are very closely interlinked. In fact, I'd consider them to be the same. And this ties in very heavily with the defeats that the Romans suffered. Last episode, we talked about the problems that came with the Carthaginian system. Notably, their reliance on mercenaries left them very vulnerable when they didn't have much money. Rome had a very different problem. You see, because Rome was such a militaristic society, all of their government was very heavily tied into the military. To even be eligible for the lowest rank in the Roman political system, you had to have at least 10 years military experience. This means that anybody who wanted to go into politics would have to go through the military first, which means that they wouldn't necessarily be the most qualified people at the time, because they're intending to become a politician. Equally, it ties the Roman army into the political factionalism that occasionally occurs in these kind of democracies. Most notably, Rome was governed predominantly by the consuls. There were 2 consuls who acted as the head of state. They also acted as heads of the army. So you'd have 2 consuls and 2 main armies. At this time, the 2 consuls were Tiberius Sempronius Longus and Publius Cornelius Scipio. Now, Scipio happened to be up in the north with his army. Sempronius Longus had the main army, and he was down in Sicily preparing to invade Africa. So here's the main problem with this. This is a problem because these are elected positions. Just let that sink in a moment. The general of the army is an elected position. And just to make this worse, they're elected on an annual basis. So there's a new one every year. This, of course, has consequences. So while Publius Cornelius Scipio is a very cautious general, Tiberius Sempronius Longus is not. Sempronius found it very important that he had to win glory on the battlefield for his family, basically, for their political ends, pretty much. And this led to him being very, very quick-tempered and very quick to a fight. So when Sempronius got up to Etruria and met up with Scipio, he made clear his intention to attack the Carthaginian army as soon as possible. Scipio, who had already fought a few skirmishes with them, didn't really want to rush into things too badly. But the problem with the consul system is that normally they hold complete and total power over their own army. But when they're together and they form only a single army, they alternate days. So one day, Scipio would be in command, and the next day, Sempronius would be in command. So if one of them had a bad strategy, there was no fully vetoing it, because they would just wait until it was their day to command, and then they just implement it straight away. This may not initially seem to be so big of a problem, and it wouldn't be if not for the fact that Hannibal had spies in Rome, and he knows basically everything. He knows that Scipio and Sempronius are the consuls, he knows who they are and what they're like, and he knows that Sempronius is most likely going to do something rash, and so he plans accordingly. Hannibal decides that he's going to just wait for the Romans, and he goes and he stalks up and down the Trebia river. Then, when he finds where the Roman army is, he waits for them to encamp. Then, he sends over some cavalry. The Romans jump out of bed, get their armor on, and line up ready for battle. The cavalry start to retreat, and the Roman army, under the command of Sempronius Longus, follows. They follow the cavalry across the river. Now the Romans, at this point, are deprived of sleep from their forced march to get up there. They've just been woken up, and they've just had to cross a freezing cold river in the dead of night. And it's then that Hannibal throws his well-rested troops against them. And most importantly, he throws his war elephants at them. The war elephants completely halt the Roman plans to do anything, and they pretty much just sit there and consolidate their troops in a single place to stop the elephants from breaking through. In warfare generally, what would happen at this time was you'd have your infantry in the center duking it out, and you'd have your cavalry on the flanks trying to defeat the enemy cavalry to try and get around the infantry and hit them from the back. Now, Roman cavalry was not terrible. It wasn't particularly great, but it wasn't terrible either. Carthage, though, had access to a group called the Numidians. Just next to Carthage, around here, most of this area is inhabited by an ethnic group called the Numidians, and they are very well known in the ancient world for being expert cavalrymen, expert horse riders, and they are very skilled. The reputation is absolutely 100% well earned. This is one of the advantages that comes from using mercenaries, is you can find people who have specialized in a single role in the military and use them to crush the more generalists on the other side. So on the flanks, the Numidians defeat the Roman cavalry and flank around them to the side and attack them from the rear. It is at this point as well that another detachment of Carthaginian infantry which had been dispatched before the battle slams into the Roman flank. It's a complete rout. The Romans are completely destroyed by this flank and are forced to retreat. Many thousands are dead. I should note also that this battle started with both armies having approximately equal numbers. The numbers are not well agreed upon, but most believe that it's around 40 to 50,000 on each side. Publius Cornelius Scipio and Tiberius Sempronius Longus return to Rome for the consular elections. A new election is held and 2 new consuls are elected. I can't quite remember their names, I'll put them up on screen. But these 2 consuls realize that there is basically now nothing between the Carthaginians and Rome, and they panic, and they do everything that they can to try and stop the Carthaginian army from going for Rome. Meanwhile, the Carthaginians are heading south through Etruria, but remaining there. For several days they cross through the swamp at the Arno River. The conditions here are extremely bad. It's a very malarial area, especially back then. Many soldiers get sick. Some men attempt to desert. To avoid this, Hannibal gets on top of one of the last war elephants that survived the Battle of the Trebia and sits at the back of the Carthaginian column. That way anybody that attempted to desert would be forced to go past him. The idea being that having the general at the back there on top of the war elephant would give people the morale to keep going. While they're crossing this, Hannibal gets a severe eye infection and ends up losing one of his eyes. So from this point onwards, he only has one eye. The Roman consuls are almost 100% certain that he's going to go for Rome. Hannibal has no intention of doing something so completely stupid. As has been the running theme these last few episodes, siege technology is terrible, and Rome has walls. So Hannibal has a better idea. Instead, he's going to go and march around Rome's empire in its back door and try to convince all of the cities that they've subjugated to rebel against them and join the Carthaginians. And it is here that Hannibal prepares the second great defeat that he hands the Romans. He encamps a part of his army on the east side of Lake Trasimene, which is here. Actually, let me get a closer up map of the area. He places the majority of his forces up here in the hills, and a small amount down here on the east side to act as a decoy. The Roman army appears on the west, and they see the decoy, and they assume that it is the rear end of the Carthaginian army. And what they think is happening is that the Carthaginian army has just passed through here to head south. And they think that if they can just attack now, that they'll be able to stop them before they go any further. The Roman army moves into this pass here, which is flanked on one side by the hills and on the other side by the lake. Once the Roman army moves entirely into this pass and prepares to attack, Hannibal orders the Numidian cavalry to block off the exit to the pass that the Romans have just entered from. With the Roman army now surrounded, the decoy wheels and attacks the Romans from the front. Then, Hannibal gives the signal, and the majority of his army, which has been hiding up in the hills, moves down the slope to attack the Romans from the side. The Romans are encircled and trapped. It's a slaughter. And just like that, another Roman army of 25,000 has been completely destroyed. If you think Rome was right to panic the first time, They are panicking like hell now. In fact, they panic so hard that they abandon the consular system entirely. You see, Rome has a political office called the Office of Speaker, or in Latin, dictator. Now, like a lot of old Greek and Latin terms that are still used today, that had a very different connotation back then than it did now. A modern-day dictator is usually an absolute despot controlling every aspect of the state. Their term is limitless and they go for life. The Roman office of dictator was not like this. The Roman office of dictator was an elected position. The office of dictator had been created pretty much exactly for this purpose, to avoid the gridlock and the potential agendas of those involved in consular governance. And to this position, they elected a man called Quintus Fabius Maximus, and he was pretty much the best person they could possibly have chosen for the job. Fabius realizes that Hannibal is an extremely talented commander and just defeated some of the best that the Romans had with comparative ease. So he decides that he's not even going to fight Hannibal properly. He's just going to block him and be annoying. So whenever Hannibal attempts to try and move down a certain route, Fabius will turn up to block that route. Similarly, if Hannibal is trying to get to a certain place to try and forage to get some food there, Fabius will turn up there before Hannibal does, loot all of the food and fuck off, leaving nothing for Hannibal to loot. Now, this is surprisingly effective. Obviously, it doesn't immediately destroy the army, but it significantly hampers what Hannibal can do. Unlike just rushing at him blindly like the other consuls had tried to do, what Fabius was doing was actually having an effect. However, no one is immune to Hannibal's genius, and Hannibal has his spies in Rome relay information to him, and they tell him everybody else in Rome hates Fabius, because what Fabius is doing is seen as cowardly. Everyone else in Rome expects him to engage Hannibal in battle and destroy him and remove him from Italy. The fact that he is not doing so makes him extremely unpopular, and this gives Hannibal an idea. Hannibal starts a plan of just sacking the hell out of Italy and destroying everything that he comes across. But before he does so, he asks who it is that owns the land that he's destroying. And if he finds out that Fabius owns it, he leaves it alone, and he doesn't burn it. And soon enough, in Rome, rumors start circulating that Fabius is a traitor, and that he has made some sort of a deal with Hannibal to not engage him as long as Hannibal doesn't burn his stuff. Ooh, that's bad. Soon enough though, Hannibal finds himself in a bad position. Had to happen sooner or later. Hannibal is trying to go through the valley at Ager Falernus. This is a valley which only has a few entrances and exits, most of which are blocked by a river. And this is where Fabius springs his trap, and he sticks his army into all of the other passes into the valley, trapping Hannibal. Now it's not the Romans that trapped, but the Carthaginians. Previously, the Romans lost because Hannibal managed to encircle them, but now he was encircled. Very bad spot. But Hannibal comes up with a way out of it. When it comes to night, he rounds up all of the oxen he can get and ties burning wood to their horns. He then drives them down one of the paths towards one of the Roman armies. When the Roman scouts spot this, they immediately call all of the rest of the Roman army over to try and block the path of what they think is the entire Carthaginian army. However, as soon as the Romans move out of position, the Carthaginians bolt, escaping the valley with their lives and getting out of the really bad position that they had been in. This was a really good opportunity for Fabius to finally put an end to all of this, but Hannibal just managed to dupe him. At this point, the people of Rome are so mad with Fabius that they actually hold another election and elect a co-dictator who is also his master of horse. This is a terrible idea because it pretty much immediately destroys any credibility that the post of dictator has, because the whole point of dictator was to have one single guy in charge. As soon as you had two dictators, what's the point? it makes no sense. They may as well just go back to the consular system. By the time any further engagements happen between the Romans and the Carthaginians, another consular election has taken place. The whole dictator thing gets thrown out. Now the two consuls are Gaius Terentius Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paulus. And just a quick note on pronunciation, the way I'm saying it may seem a little bit weird. The reason I'm doing it is because I am attempting to pronounce it the way that it would have been pronounced in classical Latin. A lot of how language works has changed in the previous 2,000 years, and the way that these names are pronounced in modern Italian or Latin is very different to how it would have been pronounced then. We do know how it would have been pronounced. So long as it is practical for me to do so and you still understand what I am saying, I will attempt to pronounce these names as they would have been pronounced when things were actually happening. So I will attempt to speak in classical Latin. When we speak about the Vikings, I'm going to try speaking in Old Norse. I will attempt to pronounce things the way that they were pronounced historically. Alright, back to the war. Echoing the dichotomy between Scipio and Sempronius from the first battle, Varro is a lot more aggressive than Paulus, and when the army hears that Hannibal has attacked a supply depot near the village of Canae, Varro suggests that they move there. Paulus agrees. Varro says that they should attack straight away. Paulus disagrees. Paulus is a little less conservative with his army than Fabius had been, but he is nowhere near as brash as Varro or Sempronius. When they arrive near Canae, it's Paulus's day to command, and he orders that they set up camp and prepare themselves to move into an advantageous position. The next day, Varro is in command, and he immediately deploys the army and faces off against Hannibal. And this is where one of the most studied and celebrated military victories ever happened in military history. Hannibal deploys his forces in sort of a V shape, like so, with the bottom facing towards the Romans. Now, a while ago I mentioned how, in Greek phalanx warfare, it's very normal to have all of your strongest troops on one side and your weaker troops on the other to prevent the phalanx from drifting. Hannibal decided to do something slightly different. He got all of his strongest troops and marshaled them in two blocks on either side of his army, and then had the center made up with all of his weaker troops. Then he placed himself and his brother at the center to bolster the weaker troops' morale. When the Roman army attacks, they do so with all of their strongest troops in the center, with the intention of breaking through the weak center of the Carthaginians. However, the Carthaginians have a plan specifically for this, knowing that this is going to happen. When the Roman line crashes into the Carthaginian line, the weaker troops in the center are permitted to retreat, to slowly back up. The stronger troops on the flanks are ordered to hold steady, and they do. Despite the Roman attack, they hold firm. The center, however, pushes back and back and back, and soon the V shape becomes a straight line. And then the Roman center pushes further, forward, inverting the line, pushing it in backwards. So suddenly, instead of the line looking like this, it looks like this. And this is when the Roman cavalry is driven from the field by the Numidians, who then wheel and attack the Romans from the rear. Despite the Romans having numerical advantage over the Carthaginians have now been put in a position where they can encircle the Romans without effort. And the Carthaginians' stronger infantry on the flanks also turns in, surrounding the Roman army. The Carthaginian army pushes the Romans in and in, destroying them from the rear. According to the Roman historian Livy, there are some Romans who dug holes in the sand and buried their heads from all of the sheer terror. After a few hours of just killing Romans, the Carthaginians eventually had to start taking prisoners as their arms were getting tired. Livy is not a particularly credible historian, as he knows nothing of military matters, but he does emphasize just how crushing of a blow this was to the Romans, as again, this was the biggest army that Rome had ever assembled, wiped out in one day. Upwards of 60,000 people lost in a single day, and that was the third great defeat that Rome had suffered at the hands of Hannibal. And with that, With the Romans appearing to be quite badly losing the war, I think I'm going to end it for this episode. In the next episode, we're going to hopefully talk about the end of the Second Punic War and how everything turned around. This has been Graf. I will see you next time. Thank you very much.